The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Steven Coll, now the editor of the Columbia Journalism Review, delves into how the company run by Trump's Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson has for decades tried to run the world. The company, of course, is Exxon Mobil. Political scientist Alan Abramowitz says Donald Trump is the least popular president ever elected. And Bill Press talks with commentator Dante Chinni about the Democratic Party's failure to win what should have been an easy presidential race. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Several years ago, we interviewed author Steve Coll about a book he wrote exposing the government unto itself known as Exxon Mobil. Now, with its CEO and chief political strategist Rex Tillerson nominated for Secretary of State, we thought a reminder of what we learned then remains in order. And we are joined today on AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, by Steve Coll, who's the president of New America Foundation, staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, previously spent 20 years as a foreign correspondent and senior editor at the Washington Post, serving as the paper's managing editor from 1998 to 2004. He's the winner of 2 Pulitzer Prizes, the author of 7 books, and most recently the book Private Empire, Exxon Mobil, and American Power. Steve Coll, thanks for joining us again today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's always nice to talk to you. And, you know, in your book about the private empire that is Exxon Mobil, you document the political pull that the company has. Who does Exxon Mobil want to see in the White House, and what is the company doing to achieve its preference?
Well, they're a very Republican-oriented corporation, especially for such a broadly owned corporation that has its owners include government workers, pension funds in California, and teachers' pension funds in New York, and all kinds of diverse Americans. But the corporation's management is very much aligned with the Republican Party. The current chairman and chief executive and their chief political strategist have both given as individuals to the Romney campaign, and their pattern of spending in favor of the Republican Party, more than 90-10 split through their political action committee, is further evidence of that. They want a Republican administration in Washington, mostly because they want their oil and gas production in the United States to be deregulated.
How has the American involvement in Iraq affected Exxon? And has U.S. diplomacy ever been outsourced to companies like Exxon?
It's interesting. They really are an independent sovereign. They don't see themselves as subordinate to any government, including the government in Washington, even including the Bush administration. So in some respects, they oppose the Iraq war because their foreign policy is a stable, peaceful world that is friendly to property rights and oil drilling, and invading Iraq in the name of democracy didn't strike them as a way to promote that. And after the invasion, the Bush administration pressured them to go into Baghdad and open an office, and they said no. And yet later, after the surge, they went into Iraq at a time of their choosing, and immediately started bidding for oil properties. And today, they're the largest American oil corporation that owns oil and gas properties in Iraq. So the war ultimately led them to where they wanted to go, but on their timeline and on their terms. And now they are producing oil and owning oil in Iraq.
Mm. What was the relationship between Exxon leaders and Dick Cheney? Were there cases in which Exxon benefits from secret decisions made by the Bush administration?
There was a very close relationship between the Exxon chief executive, Lee Raymond, and Vice President Cheney. They were personal friends. They had lived together in the same neighborhood in Dallas when Cheney was the chief executive of Halliburton. Their families knew one another. They were social friends. So when Cheney became vice president, the chairman of Exxon had really quite a private line to the vice president, and would go into Washington and meet with him one-on-one at the vice president's residence or just outside unofficial kind of lobbying circles. And from time to time, he would ask Cheney to make a call overseas when Exxon Mobil was bidding for a particular property, and he thought Cheney's influence with the head of state could help. In one case, in the United Arab Emirates, Cheney made a call that helped Exxon win an important oil field away from Shell, with which it was competing.
And these types of things are done somewhat in secret, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, Cheney, of course, is the most secretive vice president we've had in a generation, but even within Exxon Mobil, I think a lot of their own Washington lobbyists working the normal channels of seeking meetings and making PowerPoint presentations, they weren't part of this private channel between Raymond and Cheney.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're speaking with Steve Coll, president of New America Foundation, staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. His most recent book, Private Empire, Exxon Mobil and American Power. And Steve, you say in the book that Exxon's energy policy is America's energy policy. How so?
Well, they have more resources and a stronger, sort of more consistent, disciplined view of what they're trying to achieve. And what they're trying to achieve is oil and gas primacy in our energy economy. And they have a long-term, very well-funded strategy to promote that business model. And I think they have demonstrated that they're more effective at achieving their sort of more oil and gas purism than presidents term limited by our Constitution, coming and going from Washington in complex political environments, have been in securing an alternative policy. Despite announcing since Nixon, every president has said, oh, we're going to end our dependence on imported oil, I'm going to promote alternative energy. And yet the record is, over that same 40 or plus years, Exxon Mobil has achieved its objectives, and a succession of American presidents have not achieved theirs.
What is it about Exxon's management methods that makes it so unique among Fortune 500 companies? I mean, there are plenty of those companies that are strictly aligned with Republicans, or for the most part are. I mean, so what is it about them that makes it so unique?
Some of it's their scale, $450 billion plus in revenue last year, which is, we've talked about is more than the economic activity of most countries in the world. They've got a AAA credit rating. The United States government does not. They're one of a handful of corporations that has maintained that level of profitability over 50, 60 years. They have a durable, long-term business model that has a very political sort of strategy associated with it. But in terms of their corporate performance, they're also a case of extreme engineering. They're very much led by systems and automation and kind of engineering mindset. And so they bring this very data-driven, scientific, cold, long-term, interest-focused discipline to their work, and it makes them effective.
Mm-hmm. Is Exxon to blame for high gas prices, or are prices, as the company would like to claim, based on international tensions over Iran's nuclear program?
Yeah, I think global oil prices are set in global markets, and the pressures that arise in unstable places, whether Iran or West Africa or Iraq, is what affects traders' expectations. There are other factors as well. Speculation, increasingly, Wall Street speculation, money pouring in an unregulated way onto oil markets causes volatility, causes prices to swing around. I think neither the President of the United States, who sometimes gets blamed for gasoline prices, nor, frankly, the oil companies, who also get blamed because their signs are right there at the gas pump when you fill your tank, can do much to control global prices. But this is the result of a system that the oil companies themselves have lobbied to preserve over a long period of time, a system that is driven by deregulation of markets and doesn't recognize the fact that gasoline really is a kind of utility in our society, just like electric power. We just don't treat it the way we treat electric power.
Well, Steve, to many people, Exxon is the most hated corporation in the world. Should that be something for investors to care about?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think they know they're hated. They're obviously very smart people. They've got a lot of money. They think about that question, and a lot of the time they just maintain a sort of strategic defensive crouch and tell themselves it doesn't matter. I'm not sure that's right. We live in a world of greater and greater economic integration, and that requires partnerships. They have a reputation for being a poor partner in their industry, arrogant, standoffish, prickly. I think that hurts them. Also, they're very much a science-led company. In order to compete with big state-owned oil companies like China's and Russia's and India's in the next 20 or 30 years, they're going to need to be the very best science organization they can be. And their rigid, closed culture, which is, has a very poor record of promoting women, for example, which is not marked by diversity or a kind of open environment. I think it's going to be hard for them to recruit and retain the best scientists in the world if they don't open up their windows.
Mm-hmm. No, it's certainly not hurting their stock prices in the near term, as they seem to maintain a pretty high level. But time will tell, and I would actually hope that something like this eventually catches up with any company that acts this obnoxiously, if you will. Steve Coll is president of New America Foundation, staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. He is the author of 7 books, most recently Private Empire, Exxon Mobil, and American Power. Steve, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me.
And we hope to talk to you again soon. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. You want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Political scientist Alan Abramowitz correctly predicted the presidential election outcome again, and he tells us what went into the upset. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Rick Perry has taken quite a tumble since being governor of Texas. He was a twice-failed GOP presidential wannabe, and then ended up being a rejected contestant on Dancing with the Stars, the television show for has-been celebrities. But resurrection. Having kissed the ring of President-to-be Trump, Perry is being lifted from the lowly role of twinkle-toed TV hoofer to, get this, taking charge of our government's nuclear arsenal. That's a position that usually requires some scientific knowledge and experience. But as we're learning from other cabinet picks, the key qualification that Trump wants his public servants to have is a commitment to serve the private interests of corporate power. That is why Perry, a devoted practitioner of crony capitalism and a champion of oligarchy, has been rewarded with this position. As governor, for example, he went to extraordinary lengths to let the giant energy transfer partners run a pipeline through the ecologically fragile natural wonders of Big Bend, ramming it right down the throats of near-unanimous opposition by local people. Perry then accepted a $6 million campaign donation, i.e. a payoff, from the corporate boss, who later made Perry a paid member of the corporation's board of directors. He also privatized a state-run low-level nuclear waste facility, turning it over to waste control specialists, owned by his largest campaign contributor. Then he let the corporation double the amount of waste dumped there, while reducing its legal liability for damages. Then, taking even more cash from the owner, Perry pushed to let him put high-level nuclear waste in the dump. This is Jim Hightower saying Rick Perry has zero expertise or experience for the job of Energy Secretary, but he has beaucoup of both for, quote, doing a job on the American people and our environment.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Political scientist Alan Abramowitz, who correctly predicted the election result, says Trump may not have much of a honeymoon, given that his unfavorable ratings are higher than any previous person to win the White House. And we say hello to Alan Abramowitz, professor at Emory University, who's a popular expert on national politics, polling, and elections. His expertise includes election forecasting models, party realignment in the United States, congressional elections, and the effects of political campaigns on the electorate. Alan Abramowitz, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Glad to be with you.
And always nice to have you with us. You have been recognized as a premier prognosticator of presidential elections. How did you do, and what did this election teach you and pollsters?
Well, I think it taught us that some of our assumptions were not justified. The assumption that the polls would be reasonably accurate, especially if one relied on the polling average. The assumption that a growing non-white electorate, an increasingly diverse electorate, would result in a significant advantage for Democrats that would be very difficult or impossible for a Republican candidate to overcome. And it's, what we saw in this election was that the polls were wrong. And Trump did much better than even looking at the polling average nationally, and certainly in many of the swing states, and that Trump was able to do something that I thought was impossible. He was able to increase the Republican margin sufficiently among less educated white voters and white working class voters, enough to offset the growing minority vote in a number of states, in especially some of these swing states like Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, to eke out narrow wins in those states that gave him enough electoral votes to win the election, even though he was losing the popular vote.
Mm-hmm. What issues do you think swung this election, or was it perhaps foreordained after the primaries of both parties?
Well, I think that the reason Trump did so well with these white working class voters is a combination of factors. I think that it's this is a group that's been trending Republican anyway. And Trump was able to, I think, accelerate that shift because these are voters who tend to feel a high level of resentment and anger toward the political establishment in this country, feel they've been left out and left behind and ignored, and who are bothered a great deal by some of the changes that have been taking place in the country, particularly the growing racial and ethnic diversity of the country, bothered by immigration, and bothered by some of the cultural changes as well, the growing kind of secularism and the movement, the shifts toward a greater acceptance of diverse lifestyles. including, of course, gay and lesbian rights for gays and lesbians. And so what we saw was that Trump was able to capitalize on that resentment to a greater degree than other Republican candidates, even though he's not the first Republican to try to use those issues to his advantage. But he had a unique ability, to appeal to those voters. And we saw that in the primaries, and then we saw it again in the general election. Now, in doing that, he also alienated a lot of Americans, a lot of voters. And so even as he was gaining ground with these white working class voters, he was actually doing worse than usual, worse than typical Republican candidate among groups like college-educated women who are quite offended by his views and his behavior. But he was able to more than offset those losses with the gains among these white working class voters who didn't seem to care very much about some of the controversies that he had been embroiled in.
Sure. Now, let me ask you this: Do you see a 70-something-year-old president running for or winning re-election in 2020?
That's a great question, and of course, there's no way of predicting where we're going to be in 4 years.
Sure.
At this point, I mean, it'll depend on not just Donald Trump's, health and whether he, after he assuming he gets through his first term, that he's interested in a second term in the White House. But it will also depend on how the country reacts to his presidency, and we don't know what's going to happen to the economy. What will his approval rating look like in 4 years? Trump starts off, I think, as I don't know how much of a honeymoon he's going to get. Let's put it that way. As far as the public is concerned, usually, a newly elected president will see a boost in their popularity, at least for the first few months. We saw that with Obama, although it was fairly brief.
Mm-hmm.
Used to be longer. But with Trump, he's so unpopular that I'm kind of thinking that it's going to be even shorter. That he's got such high unfavorables. He's certainly going to starts out as the most unpopular newly elected president.
Well,
ever,
that's something
in modern history, anyway.
Well, and that's something we kept hearing all along throughout this campaign, was that both candidates were, the worst candidates of all time, least popular, I should say, of all time, and really the folks that were voting for Trump weren't necessarily voting for Trump; they were voting against Hillary, and perhaps vice versa. So
yeah, and that was true to a large extent.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the exit polling, we can see that actually Trump's unfavorables were quite a bit higher than Clinton's, and yet he won the election. Although he did lose the popular vote, to be fair. But he got a lot of votes from people who didn't like either one of the candidates.
Yeah.
About 18, according to the national exit poll, about 18% of voters dislike both candidates. Most voters like one and dislike the other. But of the 18% who dislike both, they went for Trump by a pretty big margin. A lot of them voted for a third-party candidate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the third-party vote was coming from. It was a protest vote from voters who didn't like either one of the two major party candidates. But among those who chose between Trump and Clinton, a lot more of them voted for Trump than for Clinton. Mm-hmm. Among that group of that 18%. So that's where he really was able to overcome his own high unfavorables. So, and among Trump voters, a fairly large percentage of them said they were voting against Clinton and not for Trump.
Yeah.
Among Clinton voters, that was not as prevalent. There was some of that, voting against Trump and not for Clinton, but that was not as prevalent there.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Alan Abramowitz, professor at Emory University. Who do you see as emerging candidates in 4 years in each party?
Well, I mean, of course, it's going to depend on whether Trump decides to run again.
Sure.
In 4 years, and whether he has opposition if he does run again. If he doesn't run again, will we see Mike Pence running, or will we see some of the other candidates from 2016 coming back to try to run again? It's just too early to really predict that. Whether Trump would get a serious challenge for the Republican nomination in the primaries, it depends on how popular he is overall.
Sure.
Typically, if a president gets a serious challenge in his own primaries, that's a very bad sign. So we'll have to see where he is in 4 years. On the Democratic side, I think it's wide open. I don't think there's any front runner. Certainly Hillary Clinton isn't going to run again. I don't think Bernie Sanders is going to run again, given his age. I think that's unlikely. And beyond that, it's just going to see who's out there.
Yeah.
Democratic senators, governors, or someone who maybe is not currently an elected official. I mean, Donald Trump won the presidency without ever having held on any elected office or having run for any elected office.
Yeah, I mean,
so maybe there'd be someone on the Democratic side who can do that.
Yeah, he's a game show host. I mean, holy cow!
Right. So I don't know if there's anyone comparable to that in the Democratic Party, or someone who's maybe an entrepreneur, a very wealthy individual who might want to go for it. And, I think it's really wide open. Maybe the guy who's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, what's his name?
Right. Mark Cuban. Yeah, right.
Mark Cuban. Why not?
Sure. Yeah. The only other people I can think of that have a lot of money would be somebody like Warren Buffett, and that's not going to work out either.
No, it's not going to be Warren Buffett or George Soros.
No.
George Soros is not a native-born
right.
U.S. citizen.
He can't anyway. But
right, and Warren Buffett, I think, is getting a little too old for this.
Well, and this brings me to my next question. Do Democrats have a problem with so many of their national leaders being so old? Clinton, Biden,
yes.
Sanders, Warren, Pelosi?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think in the next 4 years, there's plenty of time to see some new, younger, less known Democratic candidates emerge.
Certainly, Barack Obama rose up that quickly.
That's right. Obama came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll see another Obama. Although it's hard to imagine anyone accomplishing exactly what he did, but another African American candidate, or maybe a Hispanic candidate, maybe another woman. There's a bunch of women now in Congress, a bunch of Democratic women who are I think very effective, and so maybe we'll see one of them, one or more of them, seek the nomination in 4 years. But again, a lot's going to depend on the mood of the country and what happens with President Trump, and the Republican Congress, and how do they react to him, and how does he react to them? Fascinating, because I suspect that a lot of Republican leaders in Congress right now are very nervous about what the next 4 years, or at least 2 years, are going to be like.
Absolutely. Alan Abramowitz, professor at Emory University, expert on national politics, polling, and elections, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Alan, as always, we appreciate your time and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Delighted to speak with you.
Thank you very much. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, another political scientist, Dante Chinni, talks with Bill Press about how Trump got out every one of his voters in a rapidly decreasing demographic base, and how Clinton left enough voters at home to swing the election.
With the election over, and now we're kind of settled into the transition and getting ready for the big inaugural festivities, we thought it was time to invite We finally allowed Dante Chinni back, our favorite strategist, statistician, pollster, whatever you want to be called.
One of those. Some of
from NBC News and Wall Street Journal. Hi, Dante. Nice to see you.
It's good to be here.
So, Dante, what the hell happened? The last time you were in, you, like everybody else, said Hillary Clinton was going to win this election.
I don't know. I mean, I think America's on the way to being great again, and we should all celebrate that. I think three things happened that night. One is if you look at states like, and the story was really different in different states, which is fascinating because everything this year about the election and how the vote ultimately shook out was different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The votes in Wisconsin and Michigan, those losses are really about she's not getting the vote. She didn't get the vote she needed out of Detroit, Milwaukee. The vote was down in those places by a lot, way more than what the margin finally was. But, that wouldn't swing the election. I think you look at what happened in Florida and Pennsylvania, the story's different. The story in Florida and Pennsylvania is there was this theory that there was this army of kind of white voters that never turned out, and they turned out. And you do have to give the Trump people credit. Like, they found a way to get more votes out of a shrinking part of the population. And they did it in ways that were really fascinating. You look at some counties, and counties that have had
white voters when you say shrinking.
Yeah, and not just white, but white, there's this thing. Nobody wants to talk about the education thing because somehow it's bad to say that white people without a college education voted for Donald Trump. So that means, you're saying the stupid people voted for Donald Trump. Look, I'm saying that white people without a college education voted for Donald Trump. That segment of the population is more exposed to what's happening economically and globalism. They feel as though their time has passed and they're being passed by. And you look at some of the counties that had increased turnout in Florida and Pennsylvania. You're talking about places that had declines in population that had an increase in the number of votes between 2012 and 2016. In that time, fewer people live in a lot of those counties, and yet he got more votes out of them. I've got to say, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
I mean, he was making moves that looked insane at the end, and then in hindsight, was going, well, he clearly knew.
Did he get them because he targeted them, worked them, understood that that's where he had to get his votes, or was it just luck?
Well, I'm sure they're going to say it's targeting and genius.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, I will say that there was, if you look at even where he held his rallies, and this is a year ago now. I was at the Journal, and we were looking at where he's holding his rallies, and I was talking to some people I work with there, and I was like, this is really fascinating. The places he's going, if you look at the specific places he's going, lots of white people, not a lot of college degrees, and they've been struggling economically. And it was even in Massachusetts, because he wouldn't go to New Hampshire. He would go just south of New Hampshire, like Lowell, and places like this. Yeah. And it was fascinating, because he's in the media market. He gets to have some of the message in Massachusetts, so it bleeds over into New Hampshire, and he did that over and over again. He went to suburban, I think Harrisburg, when he was in Pennsylvania. In Michigan, he was going to, he went to Warren and Macomb County. That is the third element I will say of the story is that he did flip a lot of blue collar voters. So I have this type in the American Communities Project I run called middle suburbs, and those middle suburbs tend to be whiter than America. Not quite as well educated, almost average, completely average household income, true median household income. And he swung the vote in those places. Romney won those places by 2 points. He won them by 14. And what are those places? Well, they're Macomb County in Michigan. They're Lackawanna and Luzerne County in Pennsylvania. So the three things that happened, he swung blue-collar voters. He brought out this army of kind of rural white voters that people didn't know if they existed. And then she did not get the vote she needed in some states out of I really do think out of the African-American population, because it's the big cities. I mean, Milwaukee, Detroit, those are the centers. And also in Michigan, not just Detroit, but in Flint, in Genesee County, Wayne County. She didn't get the number she needed to hit.
So how do you square the fact that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million, and he won the electoral vote? Is it because they realize the popular vote, the Trump campaign, the popular vote doesn't matter, and so we're just going to focus on those electoral votes?
I think that's part of it. I really do think when you look at the electoral college map and the popular vote, we're at a point now where I was talking to Chuck actually a couple weeks ago at Meet the Press about this. We're at a point now where I don't know when Republicans are going to win the popular vote again in a presidential race, and I don't know if they need to. I mean, because you're talking about
clearly they didn't this year.
There are four states. There are 4 states with more than 20 electoral votes: California, New York, Texas, Florida. Oh, and sorry, 6. California, New York, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, Illinois. Okay? So 3 of those states aren't just Democratic. They are double-digit Democratic for the last 5, 6 elections. California, New York, Illinois. Winning by double digits. Florida is always razor thin. Pennsylvania this time, Trump won it, very close. And then Texas is the one of those 6 states that's solidly Republican still. And it's changing, but still solidly Republican. So if those are your 6 most populous states, and you're winning states like California and New York by just massive margins, and these other states are close, then look, once in the last, since 92, so 92, 96, 2004, 8, 12, 16, only once in the last 7 presidential elections has a Republican won the popular vote. 2004. That's interesting, and that does tell you something about what's kind of happened. And it's not. There's no conspiracy here. It's what's happened to the population and how it's moved around the country.
But at the same time, if you those big states, they not only have more votes, they have more electoral votes too.
Yeah, but remember, if you get 50% plus 1, you get all the electoral votes.
Right.
So there are a lot of extraneous votes in states like California and New York that essentially are meaningless. I actually did do this for Meet the Press. You're talking about millions of votes that are just completely worthless in those states because once you win it by more than one vote, the rest are worthless. And there are lots, and Democrats, because they win populous states by a lot, there are a lot of votes like that. So, I mean, there is something now when you look at the Electoral College versus the popular vote. It's not rigged, but the reality is we have spread ourselves around the country in such a way where it is the Electoral College is where the Republicans kind of have to go to win, and Democrats can win the popular vote a lot.
It's interesting how the response, the rebuttal from the Trump people on, well, you lost the popular vote by almost 3 million votes is, well, if you take away California.
Yeah, well, that's I saw that yesterday.
I see that a lot from the Trump people. It was just like, come on, guys. California still counts as a state. You might not like it.
Well, I mean, it's also the biggest state. I mean, you can't just start eliminating states.
Right,
I mean, it's like
that aren't favorable to you.
All right, well, then let's pull away the electoral. Let's, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, they should have fewer electoral votes.
Right.
It just gets ridiculous. I mean, you can't do that. You can't do it. And so it's, when I look at it, right now, Democrats are going to do well in the popular vote. The electoral vote, I don't know if it was genius on their part, but I think it is very much on. Look, if you looked at the 2012 map, what do they need to do? They needed to flip Ohio, Florida, and Pennsylvania. They flipped those 3 states. They won it, right? They flipped those, plus Michigan, Wisconsin. That's a tough mountain to climb in terms of the electoral college.
Well, I'm tempted to say that the lesson there is that Democrats ought to focus less on California or less on New York and more on the Rust Belt states. The problem is, I agree with more on the Rust Belt states, but they didn't focus a lot on California and New York because they didn't need to. Exactly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say they take it for granted, but they know they're going to do well there. I mean, Hillary didn't spend any money in California, or not much time, except to raise money.
Right. No,
Same
absolutely.
in New York. Same in New York, right?
Well, she didn't do enough though in the Rust Belt. I mean, she didn't visit Wisconsin, right? I mean, that was
did not go to Wisconsin.
And Michigan,
it's
she
the Rust
didn't.
Belt that was ignored.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that was the blue wall.
Right.
And there are look, I'm from there. There are a lot of people who feel they have been let down by the Democrats, and it's not just the Democrats, but really by the establishment. The establishment has pushed them down. This thing where everybody was shocked in this election of like, wow, a lot of people are really angry about trade agreements. It's like, that is not a new thing. That has been going on for a long time. What's new is that Trump brought it back up in this election, brought up NAFTA, which is really old at this point, but brought it up as an issue to hang just, as a peg to kind of hang the larger message of the establishment doesn't care about you anymore. Remember NAFTA? All those people in Washington, all those people in those East Coast cities, they're sitting pretty and you aren't. And, it's not even whether or not it's true, because a lot of jobs are being lost to automation. Okay, so it's a question of whether you're going to lose your job to an American robot or a Chinese robot, right? Ultimately, for a lot of manufacturing jobs. But that is a very strong message for a part of the country that has been left behind. And Democrats don't have a good answer for it right now.
We'll take a break, but in this week's, it's a double edition of the New Yorker, there was a very good article about automation. and it points out that Donald Trump's claim, I'm going to bring all these jobs back.
That's impossible.
Right, because those jobs coming back are robots.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Steven Coll, Alan Abramowitz, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.